Well, when I first saw the injustice of that Minneapolis police officer against George Floyd, it was totally, number one, it was disturbing and totally disgusting. Their total abuse of power by that particular officer, not something that 99% of the police officers in our country support and are totally against. I have yet to talk to any police officer, and I've talked to quite a few, as well as citizens in our community, that think that that was the appropriate way to handle that particular arrest situation. Yes, he committed a crime, and yes, he's entitled to due process. He certainly wasn't entitled to be killed by that Minneapolis police officer. And then it was appalling to me to see the other three officers standing there watching it. Now, I know they were young officers and probably very inexperienced, but that's total lack of training and total disregard for human life. Yeah, you know, I've been watching the news closely, just like a lot of our other community members have and citizens have throughout our country. I find it very, very disturbing what I see going on in some of our major cities. Beginning back to the training, I've heard some commentary about the fact that some police officers only go through 8 weeks of training. In Maryland, police officers in Maryland attend anywhere from 5 to 6 months of training in their initial education of being a police officer. And then there's a mandated training that occurs every year, and during that mandated training, there are several things that are covered in that training. Obviously, use of force, firearms training is in addition to the mandated training, which is also mandated, firearms training obviously, and use of force. But there's a variety of areas that are covered. One particular area that is covered is cultural diversity. All that's included, it's mandated by law to be included, and our officers do actually receive that training yearly. I think Chestertown and Kent County as a whole, we're very, very fortunate. We have good police officers here. We're not going to tolerate someone that's not a good police officer. We're going to be getting rid of them. The community as a whole, we care about each other. I'm very impressed with we've had 4 events here to protest George Floyd's death. All four events. The first one I attended, which was a morning prayer ceremony at Fountain Park. There's been another prayer walk on Friday evening, and 2 events this past Saturday. Both of those events and the other 2 events were totally peaceful. People had a right, which I support, to exercise their constitutional right of free speech, and to educate folks of where the problems might be. As a sheriff in this county, and I know a lot of my fellow sheriffs up and down the Eastern Shore, we want to be involved in our community. It's important for us. You know, I've heard the word community policing. Community policing is something that sheriff's offices do very well. I know we try our best to do it here with very limited funding. That's an area that I think that if there was a funding source that could enhance our community efforts in reaching out to the community. There are so many misinformed folks about why police do certain things. And it's important that as law enforcement, we try to educate our community so they fully understand why we're doing what we're doing. It's our job to arrest people who violate the law. If you violate the law, then you expect to get arrested. If you don't want contact with law enforcement, you have one very simple thing to do, and that's not commit a criminal act. You know, I'm always open to dialogue with the community to make our community stronger, to make our community more together as a family. And that's what I see Kent County really being, a family. It makes no difference to us what color your skin is, where you come from. It really doesn't. We are here to enforce the law fairly and make sure that everyone is treated fairly. I guess if there's one thing that you asked me about, something that might bother me, and again, this comes from watching the news too much, I guess, but when they talk about abolishing police and they talk about defunding police, this is an area that I think is going to create total chaos. It's going to be very, very dangerous for a lot of communities that think that maybe that's the direction they need to go, because you do need law and order. And it has to be done fairly and across the board fairly. But there are those folks out there that do want to abolish totally the police. And you know, a lot of it goes back to the training, a lot of it goes back to your supervision, a lot of it goes back to the leadership of the agency. Here at the Kent County Sheriff's Office, we've been accredited since 2003, nationally accredited. We are still accredited. In fact, we just completed our accreditation process prior to the pandemic. We're very, very proud of that. We meet those national standards that are best police practices. Our use of force policy is online. It's required to be online. It's mandated by law to be online. And you know, I'd encourage folks to go look at that. You know, neck restraints, you know, assaults to a person's head is something that is a very last resort to protect your own life or the life of someone else. It has to be a deadly force type of situation in order for us to be able to use that type of restraint. It's something that we do not train for. It's something that is actually forbidden here at the Kent County Sheriff's Office. You know, prior to the pandemic, we were meeting sometimes at least monthly with the social action community and the board. I was attending those functions. We had a lot of participation from the community, a lot of participation from our youth. Chief Douglas from Chestertown was also participating, or a member of his staff. And I think we were really getting into some good dialogue and starting to understand where we were falling short as a law enforcement agency to provide better communication with our community. There were so many misunderstandings, especially from our youth, who didn't really understand why law enforcement did certain things a certain way, and we were able to engage in conversations with the folks there to explain that to them. I am a firm believer that working with the community, you know, basically community policing, which is something that was more prevalent back in the early 90s and late 90s. I think a lot of agencies have maybe gotten away from that. You know, if there are laws that need to be changed, that needs to be done in Annapolis and Washington. But there also needs to be funding, and I'm not suggesting there needs to be a lot of funding, but there needs to be programs and funding sources to allow police to do community policing, to get out into the community and work with those relationships that build strong communities.